How good is Musiq Soulchild? It's your man Jet Ride here. And in the late 90s to the late 2000s, it was a subgenre of R&B that was getting extremely popular called Neo Soul. And you had acts like Erykah Badu, Jill Scott, D'Angelo, Maxwell, Angie Stone, and my personal favorite Neo Soul artist, Musiq Soulchild. Yes, the Philly native Musiq Soulchild was one of the leading acts of the Neo Soul era. Neo Soul had gotten so popular in the 2000s, they was moving crazy units, doing some of the biggest songs and having some of the biggest tours. Okay, so your man Musiq Soulchild burst onto the scene in 2000 with his debut album, I Just Wanna Sing. The album only debuted at number 32 on the charts, but dig this, it stayed on the R&B charts for 67 weeks, giving us big hits like I Just Wanna Be Friends, Love, and Girl Next Door. And one of my favorite R&B songs of all time is on this album, Merry Go Round. This was an impressive debut. Now, Musiq Soulchild's second album is where he really found success. Instead of debuting on the charts at 32 like his debut album, this album debuted at number 1 on the charts and had the 2 hit singles, Half Crazy and Don't Change. The album eventually went platinum, and by this time we knew Musiq Soulchild was serious. And then Musiq Soulchild came back with his third album, Soul Star. Now this album here has to be kind of bittersweet because it has good and it has bad. Now, this album was very well received by critics. It's his most critically acclaimed album. But this album it wasn't as successful as his previous albums. There was no real big hits on this album. But for a lot of people, this is their favorite album. But it just doesn't have the hits. It was still a gold album, but it didn't debut at number 1 like the previous album. Debuted at number 13, didn't have hits. So it's very bittersweet. Critically acclaimed, a lot of people's favorite album, but didn't sell well and no hits. So Musiq Soulchild went back in the lab. He must have known, I have to make a critically acclaimed album, do well sales, and have hits. And then he dropped the bomb, I Love Music. Woo! This album was his biggest selling debut ever. Almost did 150,000 the first week. And he had his 2 biggest hits on this album. Buddy, in the 2000s classic, one of the biggest songs of the 2000s, Teach Me How to Love. Man, at this point, Musiq Soulchild went from just being an R&B hit maker to being an R&B king to now being an R&B legend with this album. So, how good was Musiq Soulchild really? In my opinion, he defied all odds because him and all the other Neo Soul artists, they took a niche audience in the R&B community and they blew it up. You feel me? It was number 1 albums. You had number 1 songs. The genre was big and Musiq Soulchild was part of that. So, how big was Musiq Soulchild? Iconic.